Welcome to the Yo Brother Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith.
How goes it, Dan?
I'm tired.
I'm cold.
Your voice always goes through it's the same accent, I feel.
That's
Not
because
quite,
I can't do voices.
and I kind of wish you wouldn't. But
You're fired. See, it
terrible.
doesn't sound
Just
anything like
terrible.
McMahon.
No, you're not a good impressionist.
But I'm good at firing people.
Yeah, well, we're back to talk about Mr. McMahon, part 2. Mr. McMahon is a Netflix series. We did cover the first 3 episodes. Tonight, we're going to cover the last 3 episodes. So the first 3, like, basically covering Vince's rise into this, big time promoter after his father kind of, he buys him out and then he passes away and all that. And then, the steroid scandal.
Right.
And then we left off. Where do we leave off?
Screw job. Montreal
screw job. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Episodes 4 through 6, we got, we moved from the screw job, and something you said towards the end, I think, of the episode we did for part 1, which was the Bret Hart, screw job, where Vince is being interviewed, right? And he says, Bret screwed Bret. He's trying to spin this thing.
Yes.
And that really would become the rise of the Mr. McMahon character.
Correct.
And that's where we start off with episode 4 here, which is the Attitude Era.
I thought it was Family Business, but that must be part 5.
That's episode 5, right?
Okay.
So this is what really stood out to me, because I had watched all 6 back to back.
Right.
And then I went back and I just did kind of a quick run through again of 4 through 6. And it really is a fascinating documentary for a lot of different reasons. But this Mr. McMahon character in episode 4, in the beginning, he starts talking about, he's always kind of wanted to be a performer. And he talks about this old time wrestler, Dr. Jerry Graham. And this guy was like kind of larger than life in Vince's eyes. And, he had this strut that he would do when he won a match. And that's where the big I'm doing
the
more
arms
of a Conor
flailing
McGregor,
and his,
but the Vince strut is got to be one of the greatest over top exaggerated movements of all time. But I just think it's interesting that that's kind of where he started to develop this character. And let me ask you, Mike, right off the bat, we're going through all 3 episodes of the second part. Do you think that what we're seeing unravel is Vince's own demise because of who Vince really is? There's this whole thread throughout, right? It's some say, oh, it's nothing like Vince McMahon. Others say it's him, just a little exaggerated, and some say it's exactly him.
Yes.
Or do you think that he got so immersed and so obsessed with playing this character that it eventually sort of took hold a little too much, and then life imitates art? Where do you land on that?
Well, I think he was a scumbag from the start, killing all the territories, saying screw that. And he's very contradictory in this, Stan. He says, oh, I'm nothing like the character. And then, an hour later, he's like, well, I guess that's just me. But the reason I say this is because at one point during the interview, now we know there's scandals out there and sexual abuse scandals against him specifically. And he makes this statement to the person interviewing him saying, well, there's always 2 things going on in my mind. And the guy happened to say, well, what's the second thing right now we're talking about? And he starts saying, well, it's something good. It's happy. It's sex.
Mm-hmm.
Don't say that when you're a sexual abuser, that you're thinking about sex during an interview about wrestling.
Right. But you got to, but again, as we noted in the very beginning of our part 1 review, is Netflix is quick to put up on the documentary. These interviews with Vince you see took place before these allegations really started coming to the surface. Now, of course, he knows these things.
He knows about them.
He's involved in these things over the years. So I get your point, but still.
I think, I really think the Vince you see is Vince.
Do you?
And, they glossed over this. They didn't cover women the way, Tony Atlas, who's not in the
Not as
path as
much.
much,
Right.
and he's the best, he's the most entertaining person, and I
Mhm.
love the way he ends it, which we'll get to, but, um, women, they evolve from being valets, which is a person who accompanies a wrestler to the ring, to what's called the diva division,
Mhm.
where they would have bra and panties matches, which was in this second part,
Right, right,
and
right.
that
Well,
was a
that
huge turnoff to me.
so this is yeah, so this is the thing. So, the screw job we talked about, Brett leaves. So in comes guys like Stone Cold Steve Austin,
Right.
one of my, if not my all-time favorite
Yes.
wrestler, right? And we won't go into the whole history of how he becomes Stone Cold Steve Austin, but
Right.
and then The Rock, of course, I do remember The Rock's evolution from little good old Rocky Maivia into
Correct, and they
but
would chant they hated him because they were trying to force him down the
and
fan's throat.
right when like fans like we reject this character, this
Right,
guy,
and then he
right?
gets on the mic, and he cuts a great promo, and all of a sudden, he's a heel,
Hmm.
and one of the best, and I remember calling you, WCW's killing
Hmm.
the WWF and the ratings. I
Yeah.
remember calling you specifically after that pay-per-view, which was King of the Ring when Austin won, and The Rock was on the card too, and I said, "You know what, Dan? I think the tide might be turning here. They've got a couple of guys that they weren't yet developed." It was
Hmm.
that one promo by Austin after he won,
Right,
and
where
a
he
promo
says
by
this that's where the famous Austin 316
correct,
just whipped your ass. Yeah.
because he was fighting a guy called Jake the Snake Roberts, and he
Mhm.
was into religion at the time, and he brought it to the ring, like in his promos, like,
Mhm.
the man above or whatever. So Austin in his head remembered how at sporting events there were always John 3:16 signs.
Yeah.
And just out of nowhere, he
Let's
says,
talk about John 3:16. Austin 3:16 says I just whipped your.
but I remember calling you and I said, there's a couple of guys I could see becoming big. And it was Austin and it was Rock. Forget DX. They
Right,
were just a
right.
kind of a sideshow.
Which is but it's interesting you mentioned DX because Shawn Michaels, of course, was famously part of that group,
Yes.
the Heartbreak Kid, and, this is all part of this the move into, like, it's becoming more raunchy now, right? Raw.
Yes.
You mentioned Sable comes in, she's half naked and,
They
like, every
didn't mention Sunny, who was
they
before
didn't mention
Sable.
Sunny. That's interesting, you're right, they didn't.
She's
Yeah.
and you know where she is right now?
Adult film industry?
Well, she was, but now
Oh.
she's in jail for
Oh, she's in
17 years.
jail.
She got like 7 DUIs. I'm not
Yeah,
exaggerating.
well, yeah, that's a kind of a
And they
tragic
finally locked
turn.
her up.
Yeah,
But
yeah, it's a
but they
well,
totally glossed over her.
Sonny, yeah,
She was the big star that started the diva division.
right. Yeah, but
And
Sable was definitely the most
Sable was
popular.
like next.
Right, right, and Rena at that time, Mero,
Right.
now Lesnar,
Now she's Lesnar's.
now
I
Lesnar, yeah,
know. Makes you
but
wonder.
this is where it gets a lot more raunchy, and there was this whole thing they show where Shawn Michaels comes out one night, right? He's in these
Yeah.
bicycle shorts, and he's really like he's basically naked,
Yeah.
and the crowd's going wild, and Vince is like, "I'm not really sure," and Shawn's like, "Did you hear the crowd? Like this
Right.
stuff." And so then Vince, okay, I guess so, because another poignant thing you said in part one, which is it just becomes clearer and clearer and clearer as this whole thing plays out, which is whatever it takes for the business to be successful,
Yes.
that's what Vince is gonna do.
Yep.
Everybody else be damned,
Right.
family included,
Right.
right?
We watched, we ended with the screw job.
Mhm.
And if you watched that and saw it, and it was raw emotion, you would have thought
Yeah.
there's no way these guys are ever going to be in a room together for
Mhm.
the rest of your life.
Right.
And
Right.
sure enough, even after the tragic events of Owen Hart, which is that in this episode?
I was just gonna say that's how we're gonna, yeah, let's round this episode out because May 23rd, 1999, they go through this whole story about Owen Hart's death, his tragic death. Of course, it was an accident that took place at was it like a Survivor Series, or I don't remember what it
It
was.
was a pay-per-view that,
Uh-huh.
again, I was watching,
Right.
and the lights went dark. Owen Hart was playing this blue blazer character with a mask.
Which he, I did I read somewhere that Jeff Jarrett at one point was the blue blade? Did he pick up the torch after
I
Owen's
think
death?
so, yeah.
Okay,
I
I
think
read
so.
that. Okay,
And
because
but you
actually,
weren't
that's
supposed
who
to.
he was going to fight that night,
Correct.
was Jeff Jarrett.
And it wasn't like Owen wouldn't admit that he was the blue blazer. That was kind of the gag.
Right,
That was kind of
right.
the rub. But a couple of times they descended him from the roof. They
Mhm.
had done it a few times.
Right, right.
So at this pay-per-view with a full audience, luckily
They were in a
the
blackout, like you
lights go
said.
dark,
Right.
and he was supposed to descend and he didn't. He just went.
Yeah, and then they pronounced him dead in the ring, and it was so to see that footage again of Jerry the King Lawler and JR
Jim
announcing it.
Ross.
Jim Ross announcing that live on the air was wow. I can't
I
imagine.
remember thinking, I cannot believe Vince went on with the show.
Well, there's the point, right? Going back, circling back to the point I was making, which is anything for business. And that's what Vince says in the documentary. It's like, well, as a businessman, the show must go on. And here you see these guys are friends of his, colleagues
Yes.
that are now wrestling after this guy's tragically died.
You're like my go-to person when something crazy happens. I call you first and say,
Mhm.
"You're not going to believe this."
And those, it's quite often, by the way. Yeah.
And in this, watching this replay, one thing I don't remember live is there's a blood stain of Owens
Mhm.
where he landed, because he landed in the ring.
I guess so. I mean, I wondered because they comment on it in the documentary, but
Yeah.
I wonder, was that poetic license? Because there was a lot of matches that took place after that. That could have been of anybody. It was way off to the edge of the ring. I don't know if that was really
Well,
his.
if you saw the footage of
Look, it
him on
at
the
the end of the day, it doesn't matter, right?
right.
The guy tragically died. It was just a terrible incident, a dark.
Plus, Brett says he heard, they were wheeling Owen past everybody,
Mhm.
meanwhile saying, "You're up next. You're up next."
So let's move away from the
Okay.
Hart family, kind of moving into talking more about the McMahon family, because
Yes.
episode 5 is called Family Business.
Right.
And it should be family with a like slice through it and then business. Cause to me, the whole thing was, again, it was business over family, business over everything else.
Mhm.
And this is where, we get a lot more of his kids, Stephanie and Shane, in the mix.
Right. And you realize, or I did, that this wasn't a family business. This was Vince's
It's
business.
Vince's business. Yeah.
And he let his kids work there.
Mhm.
That's how I think he broached it. Even when his son, Shane McMahon, comes to him with this idea about buying UFC,
Yeah.
and Vince is like, "No, you're gonna have to kill me to get that deal done. Here's a knife, go ahead and do it, or else get the hell out."
Yeah, it's like Shane the surrogate, right? But it was never to be. And I found this fascinating looking at it again too, because it's almost mirrors the same sort of admiration that Shane really through all of this that
Mhm.
Shane had and I think still has for his father, at least this pretty high level of respect, but always about trying to get his really love and affection, right? And to say, hey, attaboy is really all Shane ever
Right.
wanted. It's kind of like Vince and Vince Sr.
And I
Really.
remember Shane doing the most extreme things, jumping. You saw them in the documentary. You
Oh,
see
yeah.
him jump off the Titan Towers, and I don't care that there was cushion under there. He fell like 50 yards.
That Hell in a
Eh
Cell. I mean, Booker T, I think, is the one that says Shane has done some of the most death-defying feats in all of wrestling.
And he proved himself as a performer And I think
Mhm.
he wanted to prove himself as the heir apparent.
Right, and it takes a weird sort of left because there's this again, all about the business, the storylines and things, right? Always creating new characters and things to generate, ratings, and
Right,
so there's this storyline about Stephanie and that Triple H. They get
right,
together, right? And then, of course, in real life, they get together and, the rest
right.
is history, but Paul Levesque would really become the heir apparent.
Of course, they're now owned by TKO, a huge corporation, so it's not the same.
Mhm.
Paul Levesque or Hunter
Triple
isn't
H.
running the show.
Right, right.
He's deciding the storylines,
Mhm.
and he's like, I don't even know what his, title is, something like COO or
Executive chairman or something, whatever,
exactly.
like Vince was, yeah.
But, another thing that was fascinating, you hear Vince saying something, and then you hear it coming from Jim Ross's mouth.
Yeah, it's like the
Those
puppet master.
announcers are just puppets for
Yeah,
Vince or
right.
whoever's sitting there. Literally, they're being told what to say.
And one of those moments was when he was watching his son nearly kill himself doing all
Yeah.
these crazy stunts. Now, talk a lot about Trish Stratus. She comes
Yes.
into the picture around 2000, and again, more of the raunchiness, and it takes a whole weird angle where, Linda McMahon, what does she suffer? A stroke or something? I forget what the storyline was, and she's like in a wheelchair and kind of comatose, and meanwhile Vince and Trish are getting it on in this storyline. It was
Right.
it was very bizarre.
And the amazing thing was Trish Stratus wasn't a nobody. It wasn't the
Right.
WWF that made her famous. She was like a famous fitness model in
Correct.
magazines, and she came in the diva era as it was changing to a women's wrestling. In fact,
Yeah.
they got rid of the diva title and made it,
Right. It
Women's
kind
World
of I mean,
Championship.
it started that way, right? If you go way back, the women were legitimately
Correct.
wrestlers, right? Right up through Wendy Richter or whatever.
Exactly.
Then, like you said, it goes into this diva with this whole raunchy era, but then it comes back around now. And again, the sort of demand almost of the fan base saying,
Yes.
we want more of the divas. And these women, they were incredible athletes
Yes.
doing incredible things just like the men. So it's pretty fascinating. But here's one of the things that stood out to me in this episode 5, Family Business, is all of the return appearances of all of these people that had left and in some cases sued
Like
Vince.
Sable.
Sable comes back. Hogan returns
Yep.
to fight The Rock, and Bret Hart returns.
Yeah. That was the most shocking to me was Bret Hart.
Hmm.
And him and I think Shawn Michaels kind of found God, whatever
Hmm.
you wanna call it,
Yeah,
and realized what a jerk he was and how badly and literally, I remember them hugging it out
they've made
in the center
amends.
of the
Yeah,
ring.
yeah.
Now Bret, his career was destroyed in WCW. He got into a match with Bill Goldberg,
Hmm.
and Goldberg used to spear people. That's when you run and just kind of throw your body
Yeah.
into someone else. And he did it so hard, he broke like half
Yeah.
of Brett's ribs, concussed him. And then as he's recovering, he
Yeah.
has a stroke.
That's right, I forgot about that. I
Yeah.
forgot that he had the stroke. Now we get to 2001, and Vince does the almost unthinkable. He wouldn't admit to that, but he buys WCW for basically a pack of gum.
Right. Like
S
2,000,000,
Right, and
which
he's
was nothing.
nothing. Right,
And
so and
not
he's
only did he get them, he got all their video library, all their source materials. He
he
had it
got it
all.
he got Eric Bischoff.
He got Bischoff to join him.
He got Bischoff to join. It's crazy. But again, what it all comes down to business. It's
Yeah,
all about the money.
and they talk about the name because during this episode, we find out about the name change. Originally, it was
Yeah,
WWF.
and I think the production team was a little kind to me in our part 1 because I start to refute that when you say it was
Yeah,
originally WWW, and I went on a rant about, "No, it wasn't, and you're full of crap," and then sure enough, it was.
right.
Why
And
would
I
I
knew
ever
I was
question
right.
your wrestling
I
authority? I
know.
mean, you established that in the first episode we did.
But at the same time, in this episode, we find out that the world wide
No, the World Wildlife Fund, I think it is.
yeah, something like
Yeah,
that. So they
yeah,
had the initials WWF
right.
already under lock and key.
Yeah,
And there
yeah.
was a big lawsuit.
Mhm.
And they came out, and there was something else too, because if they were going to consider themselves a sport, well, then you face different regulations. So by changing to WWE, E for entertainment,
Sports entertainment, yeah.
all of a sudden, this isn't a sport, this is entertainment.
Hey, everyone, if you love movies, hit that subscribe button and join us for more amazing episodes on the Oh Brother podcast.
Don't miss out.
And don't forget to leave a comment and share with your friends.
And I'll tell you, that was a huge turnoff to me. I don't
Mhm.
I don't know why. I mean, maybe because I grew up with I couldn't get WWE out of my mouth for, like,
Right.
years.
Have you reconciled that now? Are you okay? Or do you
Not
need,
really, not
okay.
really. It
I could,
still, like, bugs me.
I have a 1-900 number that you can call and talk to Jimmy,
Call back.
call Mouth of the South, and I'm sure
But
he'll counsel you.
at the same time, so the name change is going on, and then he gets WCW, and most of those wrestlers, the ones that had guaranteed contracts, didn't even they like Kevin Nash,
Mm.
your buddy Razor Ramon, they all
You
sat
go.
it out. They were
Yeah.
making $1 million a year, and they didn't have to show up.
Right, right.
So we got like the dregs of WCW basically.
Right. It was more about the IP and, like you said, all the merchandising
And the videos
the
they could
videos.
sell.
Sure, yeah,
And then
absolutely.
that helped with the network that they created, because all of
You
a
had the
sudden you
W
could watch basically any wrestling match ever.
Right. And again, I think this is more than anything, it's just Vince dominating once again. It's just about winning
Yeah.
at any price, whether that's 2 million or 200 million.
What didn't help was the fact that AOL Time Warner merged, and they could
Right.
give a less about wrestling like most people.
That was really, it seems to be WCW's demise at
It
that
was,
point,
because
which made them good for the offing, you know.
right, and I think when that happened, that lack of competition that was going on every Monday night,
Yeah.
and they didn't cover this, and I don't know if you remember, there was a Monday night where Ravishing Rick Rude,
Mm,
rest in peace,
yeah.
was
a
in
good
the
one.
ring. And remember, we talked last time about how they taped the episodes with WWF, but WCW was live.
Right.
So he jumps. He's on both shows simultaneously.
That's
It was
good.
such a slap in the face to Vince.
That's
But
funny.
without that competition, that's when I tapped out. That's when I stopped watching.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just wasn't as entertaining. It wasn't as cutting edge.
Right.
It wasn't as athletic.
And that's a point that they're making in this episode, right? Is without that, it got watered down. It just
Got
wasn't the
watered
same
down.
thing.
And Austin winds up leaving,
Mhm.
which is huge. The Rock winds up becoming a movie star.
Right.
So he's
right.
kind of out.
Yeah, all that has happened. Right, because the Stone Cold is like, I wasn't thrilled with the
Correct.
creativity or lack thereof at this point. So he said, I think I should just ride off into the
Right.
sunset.
And I thought he left because of his broken neck, which he got
Mhm.
courtesy of Owen Hart, ironically.
Oh,
We
yeah.
talked about pile drivers.
Right.
Owen Hart misjudged where his head was, and
Again.
Austin's neck was snapped.
Mike's brain, WWE Vault over there. So the one of the the biggest exits here you kind of alluded to is Shane departs.
Yes.
You mentioned, you kind of alluded earlier, he wanted the UFC, right? He was trying to persuade Vince to buy, and Vince said, "No, I don't." Because
They were losing money.
Shane wanted something for himself. He just wanted
Yes.
something that he could use and prove. And he's like, we've got all the stuff to make to acquire this and continue to make it successful. And Vince probably making the right decision, based on his business acumen, that no, I don't think that's a wise decision. And so, anyway, Shane decides to leave at that point.
Mhm.
Um, and that takes us into the final episode, episode 6, which was titled "The Finish,"
Right.
as in finishing move, I guess, right?
Right. Right.
Now, this is where art imitates art, imitates art, life imitating art and life, because there's a whole Trump angle, and we won't get political, but it's just fascinating.
Yes.
This kind of little Trump storyline that plays out in
And he
this.
basically plays his character from The Apprentice.
And it goes back to what I asked you before, and you kind of, I'm sure you have the same answer, which is this is who these guys are.
Yes.
They're okay. Maybe they've turned the volume up a hair,
Right.
but this is who they are.
Right, exactly.
You know?
And it's funny because they had this match where each one would have a representative, and whoever won, the other one would shave the head. Well,
Shave the head.
Trump had it locked and sealed that there was no way a single hair from
Right.
his comb over was ever going to get touched.
Right. Right.
And it just kind of showed these two guys really mirror images of each other, aren't they?
Perfect. Yeah, they really are. That was what was striking. There was this
Yeah.
really weird parallel that still exists to this day. But talk
Like if Vince
about
McMahon came back today,
yeah.
given what we know with the further allegations,
Mhm.
I think he would get the loudest cheer of the night.
I think he would, and I think Melznick is it Melznick?
Dave
Metzler?
Meltzer.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Meltzer. I think he makes that point, right?
Yeah.
That and then there's another woman that is commenting, and she kind of says the same thing. We don't really care about all that. 5 minutes later, we forget it, and we just
Right.
want to be entertained, right? So talk about this Vince's death and what goes on with this little. This is again another tragic turn here in wrestling, but talk about that a little bit.
Well, there was a storyline that Vince gets blown up, and they show it, and he gets into his limo, shuts the door, the limousine blows up. What a perfect editing job
Really,
by that team, because it looked like he just closed the door and it instantly blew up.
yeah.
So they were going to play it out as, Vince was going to be dead. However, while they were filming, a wrestler who was well known, Chris Benoit.
I used to call him Benoit.
Benoit. That was the joke between us.
Right.
And he was he was like 5'10", and he was in with guys like Hogan. It was hard to believe him, but he pulled it off.
Well, but he, as you said, was jacked.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
Jacked.
every ounce of his body had steroids. They find out it was on a Monday. They get word that him, his wife, and his son are dead. They don't know what happened. They don't have any details.
And as was tradition, all the wrestlers are lined up on Raw.
You see tears coming down people's eyes.
Vince is in the ring giving this very kind of solemn sort of speech.
Right.
And as that's happening, the news is breaking.
Yes. The news breaks that it was a murder-suicide. He strangled his wife. I don't know what he did to his kid, because they just didn't say.
And then he hung himself. Yes. It's just
In comes this other guy that used to be a wrestler who was very, very popular after Austin. I don't know his career at all. I was totally checked out at this point. Who was this? CM Punk.
Oh, you didn't follow him at all.
Didn't follow him, didn't know him, had no clue when and John Cena as the rapper. I was like, I'm not into that.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to watch whatever else is on. But I didn't mean to stray from the Chris Benoit thing. The story comes out, murder-suicide, and he is wiped from the vault of WWF. You cannot find him still to this day. If you do a search on their search engine, he won't come up. You can't find any of his matches because it was this horrific thing. He killed his 7-year-old kid.
That's just so terrible.
It sends shockwaves, and then they get this wrestler who was talking about CTE
Oh, right, because he goes into neuroscience or whatever, and he starts studying this, right, in the
at
CT.
Harvard.
Correct, and he starts, doing this inquiry into concussions and but it's refuted by most of the people in the documentary, including Stone Cold, I think.
Austin,
Was
I
like
mean, to me, this is like being a denier of immunization.
mm,
I mean, it's obviously these guys are taking chairs to the head, metal chairs, and people think, oh, those are, tin. No, they're metal chairs or
Mike
wooden chairs.
Mike doesn't understand the technique with the way that the chair but anyways,
No,
Mike believes wrestling is real, folks.
I mean, I get it, but like I had a DVD up last time called Beyond the Mat, and there was a
Yeah,
match with Mick Foley, who is absent from this whole documentary, which is surprising
it
because he
is,
was a
yeah.
key member when WWF came back and destroyed. But there was a match with him and The Rock, and Rock hit him 11 times with a metal chair. They go backstage, and you can see Foley's head. It's like one of those cartoon bumps,
Yeah.
that Fred
Well,
Flintstone would get when he.
I would say Mick Foley, not the best one to use as an example because,
No.
I mean, he basically ate barbed wire for breakfast. I mean, this guy did things that were just so
And
horrifically
again, another phone call I made to you during a pay-per-view, I said, "They just threw him off the top of a cage, the Hell in the Cell. It's the most unbelievable thing I've ever seen."
right. Right now,
And he was out of it.
how does that match up with Shane's dive?
I think
I
when
think
you
Shane might
see,
have had one on him there. I don't
well,
know.
I think Shane was higher,
Mhm.
but he also had a much easier fall, a
Yeah,
cushion.
but I'm
Where
not saying
Mick
yeah,
Foley, the
exactly.
cushion was the announcer desk,
Yeah,
the
right.
famous Spanish announcer desk used to get decimated every week.
Right.
But not to miss the point of this concussion protocol. All of a
Right.
sudden, this guy asked Benoit's father, "Can I study your son's brain?" Now, we
Mhm.
can only imagine what that involves, digging up the grave, et cetera, et cetera. But they do get it under a microscope, and there's all these spots from concussions that were formed. And it's there they come to the conclusion that it was all these concussions along with, because roid rage was the initial, oh, he was on, it was roid rage. But
Yeah,
they're all on
there
roid.
would have been a litany of murder-suicides
Correct.
throughout the '80s and '90s, I think, if
So
that
it
was the
couldn't have
case, but
just been that.
yeah.
And apparently, from everybody's accounts, him and his wife had a great relationship. He loved his kid. Something snapped.
The point of the whole tragedy within this documentary really is, again, just to put another spotlight on this business, right? Because then it takes a turn away from, or it actually gets away from the raunchiness now, and there's a new protocol in place now that Vince. You see a little clip of him talking, like having a meeting in the locker room, and he's talking to everybody.
Yeah.
But it becomes a little bit more geared towards a younger, like I wouldn't say family friendly, but TV 14, and it goes to
PG
PG.
14. Yeah.
No, just PG,
Oh,
right.
okay. Okay.
So, which
Yeah.
you'd think it would be the other way around, but
And, again, with the contradictions, Vince, every time Vince would say, "Oh, we're family friendly," they'd show a clip of something totally not family friendly.
right, and as you
We
said,
respect women, then you see him in a puddle of mud.
with the Benoit story, like you said, that's a great example of where Vince is just refuting it, saying, "Well, how could we know?" He's like calling him a monster,
Right.
right? Like again, these guys take recreational drugs, and who knows? He just went nuts. Like,
And then we see this interview towards the end with this guy that's asking him about, because they list all these wrestlers that died before they were 40.
Eddie Guerrero and
Right.
British Bulldog and
The guy who
Test and
yeah, Test, who was to marry Stephanie, in a
right,
fake wedding.
right,
But these guys were like in their 30s, early
yeah,
30s.
yeah. Well, so it turns a little bit there. They do a little little piece. Cody Rhodes now is into the picture, who's now, one of the big names
Yeah, his dad, Dusty Rhodes, brings him out the first night.
yeah. The evolution of the women now is really kind of taking off more than
Mhm.
it ever has. I mean, I would say it's bigger than it's ever been, right? Clearly.
It
Um,
definitely is.
and then Shane again returns. There's another
Yes.
return. Shane comes back, and we were kind of referencing it indirectly, but this incredible match with The Undertaker
Yes.
in WrestleMania 32, which was I think in 2016.
Right.
Um, and then you mentioned this already, but they kind of wind things down talking about this merger that takes place.
Mhm.
The deal, you get the WWE network, the Peacock deal, um,
Was 5,000,000,000. Wow.
5 billion. Wow, yeah, right. And then June 2022, when we did our first episode talking about Vince
Right.
McMahon, is when he steps down
Yes.
for a couple of minutes.
And
And then
comes
what
back 2
happens
weeks
there?
later,
Comes back a very short time later.
and he comes out to the crowd. It was a Friday night, which is when SmackDown is on. He comes out and just says, "Welcome to SmackDown," and then he leaves. It was almost like an FU to the lawsuits,
Mhm.
all of the different scandals.
What was interesting is they note that Stephanie and Shane, his kids, as board members, they voted unanimously against his return,
Correct, and
but
then when
he
he
had
came
controlling power, so
exactly, so he
nothing he could
fires
do.
3 of the board members, puts in puppets,
And Stephanie, gracefully, I guess,
not so
resigns.
gracefully,
Not so great, steps
obviously.
back.
Right, he
Right.
comes back, she exits stage right. Now,
Mhm.
that's not a coincidence, you
Heavens
know?
to Murgatroyd. Yeah.
And I just wonder, was it her idea or was she forced by him because she voted him out?
It yeah. And isn't he just coming back to make this huge deal, like with
Well,
Endeavor and
that's what
UFC?
the rumors are, and they come to fruition where he sells, but he remains on the board. The
But he's got
problem was
minority share. It's like
he's got
51.
49% to their
Correct.
51. So
Correct.
they can get rid of him, which they did. He
Yeah.
steps down again, but that wasn't a voluntary. That's when the lawsuit came out detailing some
Mhm.
of the scumbag things he's been doing.
So January 2024 is when the real, and again, this is a few years post these interviews that you're seeing with Vince McMahon
Yes.
throughout the documentary, but then all the payoffs, and there's allegations of trafficking and like just these really hideous things. And
Not
so
only that, but they had text messages from
and
Vince.
and the text messages, yeah.
Those were the
Yeah.
most damning thing to
Yeah.
me.
And so as of this recording, he is still under federal investigation right now.
Yeah.
So we,
And he
don't know.
sold his shares in TKO for 2,000,000,000,
Mhm.
which I think was stupid because people in the lawsuit go after deep pockets. They would have gone after TKO, not Vince person. Now he's got a couple of billion. Let's go after him.
He's got a few shekels, yeah. Well,
The
that's
greatest
that.
thing before we wrap up, the greatest question comes last.
Mhm.
And they ask in almost what,
What will
8 or
be his
9 wrestlers,
legacy? What will be
what
his
will
legacy?
Vince's legacy be? And every one of them doesn't answer. Well, that's a good question.
With one exception,
One
and that exception
exception,
is Tony
Tony
Atlas, and he
Atlas.
says the greatest promoter of all time.
And in
It's hard to
reality,
dispute that. It's hard to
correct.
dispute that.
He's right. He built something from almost nothing
Mhm.
to this huge conglomerate. I mean, Walt Disney did the same thing.
Again, the Trump parallel.
It is, here, but
You
the
could
difference,
dispute the wealth, but,
correct. The
yeah,
difference being he was handed money where Vince
right.
really did it.
Mhm.
But to say, like, if he came back, and I totally think they would cheer him, I would be, no. I'm tapped out, thanks.
Yeah, it's gone a little too far to the right at this point. So
Yeah,
yeah, I don't think that.
and
I
there's
don't, I don't
too
know.
many allegations. We find out he's paid over 12 million already in hush money,
Yeah, yeah,
and got it every day.
yeah.
It seems like there's another lawsuit that's
We'll
popping
see
up.
how we'll see how it plays out. Again, as
Yeah.
it's just recording, we don't know that,
They
but
make it
unless
seem like he gets up and walks out on them, but that was all editing.
again, editing. There's a lot of that going on, which is where Bruce Pritchard lands with this whole thing. He clearly, he's made some deal with the devil because he's like,
Right.
this is a gotcha, Pete. Like he's a 1000% in Vince's
He
corner.
brings
But
up his wife and how
yeah,
Vince saved his wife.
yeah. But anyways, it's a fascinating documentary. I highly recommend whether you're a wrestling fan or not
And
to
it's
check it
6
out.
episodes, but trust me, they go by
They go by. It's
in a
it's a
blink because you're so fascinating with these
it's
with the
it's
I think it's
riveting.
why wrestling's so popular.
Anything else to say about Mr. McMahon? We got to wrap this one up.
No, I think it's fascinating, and I think whether you like wrestling, hate wrestling, it's just a fascinating
It's
study
a
of
good watch.
people and an
Yeah,
abuse of power like none
absolutely.
other, you
Yeah,
know?
for sure. All right, folks. Well, that's going to do it for another episode of the Oh Brother Podcast. I've been your host, Dan Smith. Alongside me, as always, my brother from the same mother, Mike Smith, and we will see you next time.
Bye, everyone.